All right. Well, my name is Brad Scoggin. I am the CEO of ArborXR. I'm also one of three co-founders, and I really do appreciate you all joining this talk this morning on the riveting subject of MDMs. But I'll assume if you're here, it is relevant for you and your organization, and it's not unimportant. I heard someone say that trusting your XR deployment to a legacy MDM is like giving your grandma a VR headset and hoping she can figure out how to play Beat Saber. Just kidding, just kidding. But it is important. VR, like a lot of things in life, unfortunately, oftentimes we only get one shot at a first impression. And if that initial deployment does not go well, sometimes it can spell game over. And what we have seen again and again is that legacy MDMs just do not work for XR. And from an IT perspective, I totally get it. Using the existing or the legacy MDM that you've used for years seems like the path of least resistance. It's the system you spend a lot of money on. It's a system you spend a lot of time, maybe you've been trained and certified in. The problem is most legacy MDMs were built decades ago. They were designed for laptops and cell phones and tablets, and they just don't contain the specific functionality that's necessary to manage an XR deployment. And so the key takeaway, please, today, leave with one thing. It's that an XR specific MDM is absolutely a must if you're doing anything more than just 10 or so headsets. Just a little bit about Arbor. Hopefully it'll give you a little more context and maybe a little more weight to our perspective on things. We've been doing this for about 6 years, solving these very specific pain points for scaling XR in a business setting. We're excited that today we're working with over 800 companies, and that includes everything from several dozen Fortune 500, several dozen more of the Global 2000, lots of ISVs and content creators. And then over in education, we got K through 12 and several dozen major universities. We're also partnered with Qualcomm and HP. And those partnerships have been really good for us. With Qualcomm, we're their preferred MDM for XR. And we're working really closely with them to bring a zero-touch enrollment solution to several of the major headset companies. And it's been really cool with Qualcomm just to see how much they care about some of the minor pain points, or what may appear minor from the outside in XR. So it's been great working with them. And then HP, we've been working with for almost 2 years now. And HP sells a white labeled version of Arbor through their sales channels on their network globally. And that's been a really great relationship as well. It's been challenging. It's forced us to level up, meeting their requirements, QA, security, et cetera, but also getting access to their customers over the last few years as we've built the product. So I guess my point is just that we've been doing this for a while. We all joke 6 years in XR, 6 years in a startup feels like, 20 years in normal life. We've been doing this for a while. We've worked with a lot of high-end clientele, and it's forced us to think a lot about scale, think a lot about security. And we just learned a lot over the years. And so that's what I want to share with you today. But to get started, I want to start with a story. And unfortunately, a lot of our larger clients don't like for us to use their name. So for this case study, we're going to call the client X. And this is a fairly recent story, but every time I tell this, I always think, I could be making this up, right? It's client X. We could call it whatever we want, but I'm telling you, it's a true story. So it's a painful story, but it's a great story, I think, to illustrate my point for today. So client X had 4,000 devices. So not a huge deployment, but not a tiny deployment. Those headsets were spread across 30 locations, and they made the cardinal sin of using a legacy MDM. And it was very painful, very frustrating, lots of friction points, so much so that they called us, and the ultimate solution for them was to ship every single device back to the IT department, costing about 10 grand, then manually factory reset every headset. Thankfully, they could quickly put Arbor onto the headsets, but then ship or package up all the headsets again and ship them back to the tune of another 10 grand. And when I tell this, I think, man, I think the most painful part for me personally would be putting headsets in boxes. That just sounds horrible. But I want you all to hopefully avoid the pain of client X. And so the challenges that we see, that we've observed with legacy MDMs in an XR deployment are really in three buckets. So the first is application support. Second is user experience. And the third is the in-headset experience. So let's just jump in with application support. Number one are the file size restrictions. So most legacy MDMs were built for a lot smaller content file sizes. So they usually top out at about 2 gig. And as we all know, XR content file sizes are a lot bigger. So kind of out the gate, there's a major limitation with most legacy MDMs. Obviously, that's not an issue with Arbor. Second, there is often no ability to manage different versions. And the reason that's important in XR today is most content outside of education is custom or bespoke content. And so we see a lot of content creators testing different versions with different groups, and not having the ability to have different versions live at the same time or roll back easily if you need to has been a pain point for a lot of folks. Third is there's no differential updating. So back to point one, with XR, we're talking about a lot bigger file sizes. And with a legacy MDM, every time you update a piece of content, you're updating the entire file. So imagine, let's pull back, whatever your world is, imagine 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000 devices, and you need to update content. And you just want to make a small tweak to the content. Using a legacy MDM, you're going to have to reinstall that and download that full file size across 1,000 headsets, which takes a lot of time. With Arbor, we do offer the differential updating. There's also no content sharing. So what I mean by that is there's not an easy way for the content creator, most of which are outsourced at this point. There's not an easy way for them to get the content to the company that then goes into the MDM that then gets pushed out. A lot of our content creators also work with multiple companies. Actually, in the last couple of weeks, we signed up a couple of big content creators who have like hundreds of clients. And so having the ability to upload the content once into your Arbor profile, and then from there, it's just one click to whatever customer needs to use it, has been a huge time saver. There's limited visibility into app deployment. So of all the things I'm going to talk about, this is the one for me personally that always just really sticks out. So you're pushing content out to a headset. There's different statuses that could be happening. It could be, partially downloaded, maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's completed, or maybe there was an error. With a legacy MDM, the only way to know the status of that content deployment is to put on the headset. And I wish I would have grabbed a headset. We could all just pause for a minute and put on a headset and take it off. Put on. I mean, how many times? How painful and annoying is that? And this is especially painful, like with Client X. They have a centralized IT department that's managing across 30 locations, and oftentimes the folks in the field that are doing the deployments aren't super technical, and they don't want to put that burden on them. So with Arbor, you've got everything in a centralized panel dashboard. You can see real-time status updates of content deployments. And then last here on the application support, that there is no visibility into app usage. So just with where we are in XR right now, we're all trying to still prove the efficacy in some form or fashion, whether you're in a pilot or if you've got investors or whatever it may be. With legacy MDM, you've got no visibility into how often the content is being used, when it's being used. We offer full session analytics that helps support the efficacy of XR. And then let's bump over to user experience. So first, most legacy MDMs have a very non-intuitive web interface. So much so that oftentimes there is specialized training that you have to go through to get certified to use the MDM. Love this quote from one of our Fortune 500 clients. Trying to use a legacy MDM for my XR deployment is hell. I think that is a great way to put it. Next, many of the features aren't relevant. So as I said before, legacy MDMs built for tablets, cell phones, laptops. They have a lot of great features, but a lot of those features, number one, just aren't effective or are not necessary for XR. And number two, a lot of them don't work. And there is no indication of what features do and don't work. So you're left guessing. So it's just a very painful, frustrating process. Our platform is very intuitive. I mean, it's a powerhouse, but we built it very much with simplicity in mind, at least from a user perspective. And then last year, but definitely not least, with most of these legacy MDMs, the initial device enrollment process is very manual. It's multi-step. It's painful. I'm going to keep saying the word painful. And it's painful Just as an example, you download the MDM to your PC. You plug in one headset to your PC. You run a manual ADB command to get the MDM onto the headset. You run a second ADB command to set the MDM as the device owner. Once all that's done, we get to go back to our favorite exercise of putting on the headset, and then everybody's favorite thing, you get to sign in VR. So it's a very frustrating process. Arbor, we've got a lot of different enrollment options depending on which hardware company you work with. You can do multiple devices at once at a much simpler process than most typical legacy MDMs. And then last is the in-headset experience. So first and foremost is that there's no VR launcher. So a lot of these legacy MDMs do have kiosk mode for tablets or cell phones. Typically doesn't work for XR. And I want to be clear, we probably all know this, but the in-headset experience early on, even for me, it felt like, okay, it's a nice to have. Okay, it's cool. You put on a headset. It's a cool, pretty environment. It's really a lot more than that. It's a security feature. It's limiting the user's access, whether that's a student or a trainee, to only the content that you want them to get into. You don't want them to get into settings menus or games or on the web. And so we've got a beautiful launcher that you can customize just for your user's experience. And then last here is that there's no NVR single sign-on. So this obviously flows out of having a launcher. If there's no launcher, then there's no way to do the NVR single sign-on. Why this is extra important right now in XR is that unlike a cell phone or a tablet that are a one-to-one relationship, most XR headsets are being used by multiple people. And so it's really important to make sure that the right user is getting into the right content. And obviously the opposite is true as well, that the wrong user isn't getting into the wrong content. So here's the picture. Any one of these friction points on their own, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's overcomable. And maybe several of them are overcomable with a few headsets. But the reality is it's not just a few friction points, it's a lot of friction points. And I think most of us are thinking about and working with much larger deployments than 10 headsets. And so ultimately it becomes this death by 1,000 cuts when you're using a legacy MDM. So we built Arbor specifically to solve these problems. And I want to end here with a good story, a fun story. So Axon is a company that I can talk publicly about. They've done a lot of PR. Axon is a really cool company. They used to be called Taser. They actually invented the Taser. Their goal as a company is to make the bullet obsolete. So they work with police stations across North America, at least, maybe beyond that. I know about North America. They do the body cams, and they've created some really cool training content, things like de-escalation training, empathy training, working with HTC. They're using the Focus 3, and they've rolled that out across North America. So let's just walk through their process just real quick. They've got thousands of devices that they need to get quickly provisioned. So Arbor and HTC work together to make that happen quickly. Then the headsets are shipped to the field. They're at different locations. From one location, their main headquarters can see where their devices are located, the device health. They can push content. They can update content with differential updating. They can roll back to different versions, all seamlessly from one location. And then, as I said before, ultimately, they can restrict access to just the police officers that they want to get into the headset. Once they're in the headset, they're focused. They're not getting lost in settings menus. So this is hopefully the positive outcome that we're all looking for. What's next? I want to hit this just real quickly because it's important. Everything I just went through is very much a problem today with legacy MDMs in the XR space, but it's really just scratching the surface. Just a handful of questions that are requests that we get very regularly right now. How can we track the learning outcomes? What about hooks from my LMS to the XR device? How can we see what users are seeing in the headset during a training session? Can we remotely launch or pause applications for users? We actually just launched this feature. Can we remotely communicate and guide a trainee during their session? Can we stream XR content to devices? Can we create web XR shortcuts in the devices? So the point being, everything we just went through is really kind of like basic MDM functionality that's been built for an XR. But the needs of XR extend far beyond that. And these are things that it's very unlikely that any legacy MDM ever remotely considers touching. And for us, we're a product-led company. We have a public roadmap. And so as these requests come in, we weigh them and we prioritize based on what's being requested at the time. A couple quick things here just to wrap up. I talked a lot about removing the friction. That's really important for us. So one of the things we just did recently, one of our observations has been that typically deployments that are below 50 headsets are still in some sort of a pilot or proof of concept phase. And oftentimes, even in large companies, that's being done with an XR champion that may be on a limited budget. So we bumped up our free device limit to 50 just to hopefully make that even easier to get started. And then last, I'll leave this up here for a second. But for those of you who maybe are the VR champion and you're having discussions with IT, and IT says, why? Like, this is fine. And I think that, the question is also like, well, is it possible to do a deployment with a legacy MDM? Yes. And like I just moved from the Midwest out to the West Coast for the second time. Is it possible for me to make the move without a car or without a plane? Yeah, yes, it is possible, but it's painful. So really appreciate everybody coming. Let me pop back over and see if I can answer some questions. We do have, thank you for those of you who said it's a great presentation. We do have a blog coming out early next week that is basically this presentation. So that'd be a great resource if you needed to forward that on to somebody that you're having conversations with. The other thing is, I think within that blog, we will link to a more technical blog for those of you that are maybe having more technical conversations about the challenges of legacy MDMs. And that gets into some of the differences in most of these legacy MDMs were built for Android Enterprise, and they use a lot of the tools that exist there, where XR headsets are built on Android open source. And so there's a lot there. Yeah, right. So right now we support all Android standalone headsets. So HoloLens, no, not right now, but MetaQuest, yes, absolutely. All VR and AR devices. I mean, we're working closely with most of the OEMs right now. So absolutely. Yeah, links, yes. All right, I think we're at the end of the time. Again, really appreciate everyone attending, and hopefully it's helpful. Oh, Q&A, dang it. Oh, dang it. Sorry. Okay, if you're here, I'll answer these questions really quickly. Valerie, so how many devices before you need a legacy, or not a legacy, an XR specific MDM? It definitely 100% depends on the use case. I mean, how often are you pushing content? The manpower that you have. For us, and honestly, every time I get asked that question, I used to say, a few dozen. It's like I lower my answer every time. So you could probably get away without one for the first, dozen or two, but beyond that, it really starts to get painful. And again, I mean, if you're going to push content one time, if all the headsets are local, if you've got a few folks that are technical that are running the operation, you could probably expand beyond that. Hooks to LMS. So, I mean, one of the big things, obviously, maybe it's the number one thing with XR is it's all about training, right? And so being able to track the learning outcomes is something that's really important to a lot of the Fortune 500 that we talk to. And legacy MDMs are never going to do much there at all. If anything, we'll never build an LMS, but there is a lot of opportunity for us to to pass some of the data from the content into the company's existing LMS. I think, Edward, in the next 12 to 18 months, I think a lot of on the learning side and some of the learning management stuff, going deeper with single sign-on, event tracking, That feels like kind of the next big wave that's really, really important. And I think for us at Arbor, I mean, one of the things that we're most excited about with XR is not just that it's this novel technology, but that it really is facilitating a revolution in learning and training. And that's just such a foundational part of what XR is doing. So being able to make that process more seamless for companies that are doing training, there's a lot we can do there. And I think kind of see that being more of our focus. In some ways, it feels like we've gotten most of the real foundational components built, and we'll continue to improve those and build those. But I think we're excited about moving more into the learning. DoD or military training. A few of the content creators that we're working with are doing some military stuff. We haven't gotten directly involved with that yet. And maybe we will, maybe we won't. Kevin. Any other questions? And maybe you all already left. Yeah, so MDM, mobile device management. So it came up when laptops and cell phones became a thing. Most large companies have some sort of mobile device management platform they use to manage thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of devices, to lock down those devices. So it's something that's been around for a long time. And XR headsets, standalone headsets, they're built on Android just like most tablets and cell phones, but the needs are just very, very different. All right, thanks everybody. If you have any questions or you think of anything else, feel free to email me. I'm sure my email's somewhere on the bio, but it's Brad@ArborXR. And also check out LinkedIn. We're fairly active on LinkedIn if you want to make it connect. So thanks everyone.